Thanks a lot for bearing with me for another year. I'm Boris Mouzykantskii. I want to speak about advertisers. 20-second summary. As an industry, we somehow managed to fail advertisers. They have the money, and that's a big problem for them, and probably even bigger problem for us. IPONWEB, engineering company, doing some machine learning, or I should say mathematics now. I was struggling to find a metaphor for an advertiser. They're extremely powerful, so I picked up this Jedi Knight. Also, like Luke Skywalker in this movie, they are confused, they're very vulnerable to bad advice, and they're constantly searching for the right path. The reason why they're so confused is that at the end of the day, it's really difficult to understand whether advertising works for them, or if it does, then how well it works for them, because you can measure how much you spend on all the channels. You can figure out what's your sales and what's your revenue, but you ultimately don't know whether this particular consumer would buy from you without ad, or whether the reason they bought from you and not from your competitor is because they saw something. That's at the core of their confusion, and ultimately it's a very difficult problem, and some people believe it's a scientific problem. Some people believe it's a technology problem. Okay, next one. Interesting. It doesn't like me. Two paths. So the one path is, let's treat all this as art, and then basically do what feels right. Go and buy an ad in Super Bowl, or target young females on a particular list of sites. Trust whoever does it for you, and basically call it a day. The other path is more difficult. It's measurement, attribution. Essentially, it starts with inventing a proxy signal. As I say, they don't really know whether it helps their business or not, so they invent something which happens relatively soon after the ad was watched. Could be click, could be conversion, and then you try to equate the success in driving this proxy signal with the success of the business. So they call the first path brand advertising, which is a little bit misnamed, because at the end of the day, both parties, they still want to promote the brand, and both parties want performance. The difference is that when you talk about brand advertising, you really try to do it as art. And the strategy used to be relatively simple. You create the great ads, and then you get somebody to actually execute what you want from them. And that somebody was agency. It had a ton of control. It earned serious trust. Unfortunately, not dissimilar from how it happened in the movie. Something went wrong, and a few years later in programmatic, we're learning that, well, maybe that was not a good idea to trust them after all. They've done some bad things. Don't really blame agencies. Like, look what we've done as an industry for the advertiser on a relatively technical topic of what type of auction we will be running. Back in 2009, we said to advertiser, you know what? It will be second price auction. That means you can trust us. You can tell us what this particular impression is worth for you. You can tell us the true value of this impression, and then we will discover the fair price automatically through the nature of auction. In the intervening years, we figure out that if we take this knowledge of the private value and take a little bit of advantage of that, just a little bit, then, you know what? The advertisers, they wouldn't notice. Of course they wouldn't notice, because as I said, they're ultimately confused because they don't really know how to measure advertising in the first place. So back, fast forward to 2017, what now we're telling them is, you know what, we can't really keep stealing this important information from you, so let's come clean, let's be transparent. It will be first price auction. which basically means that as far as price discovery is concerned, the advertiser needs to go and do it themselves. They can't trust auction. It's an interesting lift, which they now need to invest in. Looking at that 8 years of evolution, that's probably a breach of trust of some sort. Now, where is technology on all this? Fundamentally, in this brand advertising path, you need to rebuild the trust somehow. Now, they can use, the advertisers can use technology to do some validation to ensure transparency, to make sure that those females they're buying are real females. They probably need some technology now to shade the true value, which we told them they need to tell us. Either way, the technology is secondary. The trust needs to be rebuilt in some other way. Now, on the second path, on the path of performance advertising, the key challenge is that in order to estimate, in order to compute performance, you need to come up with a proxy. And over years, the industry invented many, many different metrics which all could work as proxy for success. The problem with those metrics is they're relatively standard. And on one hand, there are very well-meaning and maybe somewhat misinformed actors who take the proxy signal and really, really try to optimize it. Now, because this proxy is only proxy, the machine learning of any description will inevitably find pockets of inventory where this proxy no longer correlates with success. And that could be some bad UX. It can be some incentivized clicks. So it can be as simple as that. Here is a movie site. I'm watching this movie. I'm in the middle of it. An ad comes up, and I want it to disappear. I will click it no matter what. And that's a terrific. It's terrific for CTR. It's terrific for cost per click. It doesn't do anything for advertiser. If that was not enough, there are kind of very, very, very well-informed but not well-meaning actors who basically figure out that they can go and keep deploying all sorts of also machine learning-driven feedback loops to basically game the proxy signal with the sole purpose of gaming the proxy signal. Now we call it, okay, fine. We say that's fraud, and we know how to deal with fraud. The problem here is that fraud is not black and white. We kind of educated the advertisers that either it's fraud or it's not fraud. In reality, it's somewhere, almost definitely somewhere in between. There is a constant battle between anti-fraud vendors on one hand and those guys on the other hand. And in many ways, the fact that the industry consolidated around 2 or 3 huge, important, and standard anti-fraud vendors somehow helped the guys on the other side, because now they need to fight only a few very well understood filters, and then they're through. So at the end of the day, unfortunate state of affairs is that when we try to game a little bit this proxy signal, then pretty much everybody wins. The publisher gets a bit more traffic and a bit more spend. Advertising industry gets a bit more tax. Agency gets the budget fulfilled. The only party who somehow feels upset is the advertisers. So what are they doing? Well, they basically take their weapon, they take their budget and kind of move it away. And then they basically say, look, as far as the results are concerned, there is no difference. We took away this money and there is no difference. Well, it's a little bit unfair. There was a difference. I'm not sure that's a consolation to the advertisers, though. Now, look, taking budget away is a short-term thing, which I think is very understandable. Long-term is probably not sustainable, because at the end of the day, the media consumption grew only a bit. The internet as a share of media consumption in those 8 years grew by more than, the media share more than doubled, the internet share. So they need to bring their budgets back. So how the technology can help them to do it? Several things which the advertisers or technology vendors working closely with them needs to solve to get us going again. Now, one thing which is a problem which we created is that today working on the demand side is really difficult because we have duplicate bids. So one impression is represented in multiple different ways. We have resellers. We have inventory which is grossly mispriced because we claim it's second price, it's actually first. We have bogus data, both in terms of real segments and in terms of identity, which is not real identity and all that. So all that needs to be cleaned up in order for the advertisers have a chance to do anything. Yeah, that's thing again. It doesn't want me to talk about the second price. I don't know why. OK, so this business about first price auctions. So it was difficult enough, this sort of apprentice task for the advertiser to figure out what this impression is worth for them. What's the true value of the impression? That's a difficult problem. What we tell them now is that, you know what, that's not enough. In addition to that, you need to work out what's the fair price. What's the right price for this impression on the market? Now, mathematically, it's not that difficult. What you need to do, you need to take this private value, which you already know. You need to subtract bid from it, and then you need to maximize the product of that term and the probability of winning. That's if your budget is virtually unlimited. If your budget is limited, it's roughly the same thing, but now you need to take into account that you can only spend that much. You need Lagrange multiplying it. So you solve this, and solving is also not that complicated. The difficult part, at least for advertisers, is to go and model the probability of winning. And that obviously should depend on bid. That's the core. And then, of course, it needs probably depend on the user. It probably needs to depend on the placement. And the advertiser probably doesn't have the wealth of data to do that properly. So somebody needs to help them. And essentially, as an industry, we landed this problem onto their footsteps. So, and then you can compute bid from either of those two equations, depending on whether your budget is limited or not. And then finally, you need to keep adjusting the Lagrange multiplier if you need to stay on budget. You still need to use all the verification methodology because they're there, because they're catching really bad guys. But you need to remember that they're not catching the people who over-optimize or over-game your metrics. Essentially, to move on, what you need to do is to stop using common proxy signals. You should stop using, as an advertiser, clicks. You should stop using installs. You should stop using simple registrations. And instead, you should drive or get your technical providers to drive machine learning loop through some custom proxy signals which are unique to you. And then the guys who are kind of optimizing to the standard one will not have that inherent advantage over whatever you're doing. Now, those custom proxies could be some interaction with widgets, some in-app activity. So, for example, here is website of Tesla. And if they need to do any advertising, they could say, look, my proxy signal is the visit to my site. That would be common proxy. That's not a good idea. Or they could say, you know what? The success or proxy for my success is when somebody actually tries to interact with the widget, tries to kind of look at my car from different directions and whatever. So that would be something custom that's difficult for other parties to game, and that probably will better correlate with the success. So the strategy which seems to work is don't use common proxy at all. Figure out the custom proxy, custom for this advertiser, custom for the thing they're trying to advertise. And then the true value, the actual sales for the advertiser, monitor it constantly, use it, and try to understand whether incrementally you drive this value or not. Now, today, the practice looks similar, but actually is very different. Most of the parties use common proxies, and they use them to drive machine learning loops. And even worse, they get those proxies to kind of justify their technology to the advertisers. Now, that basically games the proxy. Machine learning system trained to generate installs will generate useless installs, at least if machine learning is optimized well enough. So incrementality is the ultimate proof that whatever you do works. So you need to accept that only maybe 80% of your users should see your ads. The other 20% is consistently devoid of the joy of looking at your ads. And then you use this holdout group to figure out how much sales you get from the users who didn't see any ads and how much sales you get from the users who did see the ads. That's a very noisy metric. It's actually difficult to measure. And when you do it right, what you typically see is that this incremental signal, the incremental true value coming from the users who saw the ads, kind of is low most of the time. It's probably even not far from the statistical noise. And then it peaks big time when something else externally forces the user to go and make a purchase. So it could be something like back to school. It can be something like winter holidays. And the reason for that is that ultimately, at the end of the day, the advertising cannot create the urge to buy something. It's not designed for it. What advertising can do is when that urge comes from elsewhere, your advertising campaign will make sure the customer picks up you rather than your competitor. That's what we're actually doing here. That means that, for example, if I'm running this incrementality measurement, in early June, then I wouldn't see much incremental signal in June, in July, first half of the August, still empty, and then woof, big time, back to school, I see a huge. People who saw my ads 2-3 months ago are now coming and buying me rather than my competitor. Now, our typical standard industry 30 days attribution window doesn't catch that at all. And selling advertisers something which doesn't work for 2 months, 3 months at a time is actually really difficult. So to sum it up, it's a long path of learning for the digital advertiser. They need to do something with the supply path. They need to invest in true price discovery because we're not doing it for them anymore. They need to use all the verification systems. They really need to start thinking about how to optimize towards custom success signals, the signals which are very difficult for other parties to game. And then they do need to at least invest in incrementality checks and basically prove that advertising works by referring to those incremental measurements. Now, once we do all that, we bring balance to the ecosystem. And we can help a bit with technology. Thank you very much.